I am so pleased today to be able to interview Janice Goldwater, somebody who I've known for several years and who, as I see, is a real leader in our field and has so much to offer all of you who are having the opportunity to watch this video. And so welcome, Janice, to the NCAP Legacy Series. We're absolutely thrilled to have you. And I'd like to start out just by letting you introduce yourself in terms of whatever you want, credentials, your organization, the kinds of things that keep you really busy day to day in the world of child welfare.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Sharon, for both identifying me as a leader and for inviting me to join on with you. I know you and I have known each other for so many years,
Yes,
and
yes.
it's just been such a joy to grow and be in this space with you.
Thank you.
So I am a social worker. I'm a social worker by training. I'm a licensed clinical social worker who began with an interest in mental health and then found my way into adoption. When I found my way into adoption, it was about the most exciting thing I had ever experienced. And so I just dove in and learned everything that I could. What keeps me and I started Adoptions Together in 1990. But what keeps me incredibly busy and excited is learning, growing, taking information, translating it into practice, evaluating what we're doing, growing from it, and just recognizing that every life matters and how we treat each other is just so important. And the more we can understand like what's behind behavior, the better the chance we have for human connection. And as somebody whose personal mission is all around enhancing the ability to understand and to connect as human beings, working in the adoption and sort of permanency realm, because today I would call it way bigger than just adoption. It's all about how do we ensure that our children are within safe, secure families that hopefully are attuned so they can grow and thrive. Because I believe that children are really the future, and the safety and stability of families that they live in is really critical. Today, I look at so much more than adoption. I look at the whole structure of families from the time of how families live in the community, how families are treated by the community. You know, ideally, children would be able to be raised in the families they're born into. And if we can do more to strengthen those families, less children would even need to be adopted.
That's beautiful. I appreciate that. I don't know that anybody else has really talked about it from that perspective. Um, where is Adoptions Together located, and why did you found it? What was the need, and how has it changed over the years?
Sure. So Adoptions Together is a licensed child placement agency in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. So we hold three different licenses. I started the agency in 1990 because I saw there were some real problems in the community. For healthy majority race infants, there was every opportunity for an expectant parent to explore adoption and choose adoption as an option for their child. For everybody else, there were social services. So if a woman was pregnant I started doing this work in the 80s. And if a woman was pregnant, she'd call agencies and she would apologize. She would say, I'd like my child to be adopted. And then she would identify a little about herself, possibly including her race. And she'd be told, I'm sorry, we don't have families for your child. You need to call social services.
Wow.
So I believe that every child, every human being has the same value regardless of any single variable. So I started Adoptions Together with the purpose of welcoming every child who is in need of a family, regardless of their health, their race, their age, their circumstances, and really looking at each individual human being. The second piece was the families. I remember watching watching the news one night, and there was a recruitment piece that was done, and there was a woman who said, from another organization, a religiously based organization, and she said, "So, if you're a married couple of this religion between this age frame, call this organization because we need parents." And I was in the background going, "And if you're single and you're of other religions or you're LGBT, if you're mature and you're stable, call adoptions together because we need families. We need families of lots of different races, religions, sexual orientation, gender expression, and we need single parents." And so it was we say every child, welcoming every child, every family, broad-based, but maturity, stability, the capacity to raise a child underlies everything we do, but no single variable like what religion you are or what race you are or what your sexual orientation is. That does not define who we are. That's one part of who we are. And then every step of the way, I saw that adoptees were much more highly represented in the mental health systems, both in inpatient and outpatient, and really wanted to understand why and what we could do differently in terms of our practice. So from the very beginning, we began doing parent support groups, and I was trained in my master's degree program. I went to Washington University in St. Louis, where we had a great program, and we were taught that primary prevention through education is really critical. So the more information we can give people, the better choices they can make. And inform how they proceed in their life. So I wanted to make sure that we did as much psycho-ed as we could, gave people as much information. And back in the 80s, we were recognizing, and into the 90s, we were recognizing that this theme was going on, but we really didn't understand why and what was behind it. So in our work, we really dove in and researched, explored, used our practice to develop our practice, really dove into the implication of attachment and trauma and understanding the brain and neuroscience and sort of what goes into a relationship and what are the unique issues that are that happen when a child is not able to be raised in their first family, and what are the things we need to deal with? Because if we can deal with things, if we can notice, name, and make it speakable, then we can find a way to deal with it. So, our third piece is the every step of the way. And so in addition to doing child placement, we also have a very holistic scope of post-adoption support services, everything from interracial family support groups for families of different races to just general parent support groups to therapy, parent coaching. We have a book group and, different kinds over the years, many different kinds of specialized services where we can create a community where people feel seen, heard, and understood.
That's beautiful. I know since the 80s and into the 90s, when you started adoptions together, we've moved a lot in this country from very closed, confidential to more and more openness over time. Has that impacted your practice as well?
I'd say yes, it has impacted the practice. I probably always had more of a bias towards open adoption, because I think that the more we know, the better off we are. And I think that generally when things are secret, might be something wrong, and that's why we have to keep secrets. In fact, I still remember back in the 90s when you came to DC to speak at a conference, and I stole you away during lunch to come to my aunt's house. I don't know if you remember, in Georgetown, excuse me, to meet with some of my staff to talk about open adoption when there was mental health issues with the birth parents, and when there's complicated issues, how do we facilitate open adoptions, and how do we really stretch and understand? So we from the very beginning have had a bias towards it, and at the same time recognize that our job is to educate, inform, and allow people to make the choices that they want for themselves. So the big difference I can see is that many more people now are choosing open adoption. They've learned not to fear it from the adoptive parent side. From the birth parent side, they've learned that it's not going to make the pain go away. I think when open adoption first came out, people were like, well, birth parent, this is going to make it not hurt so bad because the grief's going to go away. And what we have seen change is that many of our birth parents report that they don't wonder how their child's doing because they have access to how their child's doing. They have a relationship with their child, and they still grieve. They grieve the loss of their ability to be the parent. From the adoptive parent side, many of them were really scared because they thought, I'm not going to really be a mother if the birth mother is in the picture. I'm not going to really be a father if the birth father's in the picture. Instead of saying that there can be plenty of love for everybody. And now that we have enough people who are adopted, who are adults, and speak out and talk about how much it benefited their lives and how much more whole they have felt as human beings, I think it's taken a lot of the fear away, and people can recognize that there can't be too much love and concern for a child. And, the less things that we have that are secrets, the better. And just like in any family relationship, when there's challenges, we need strategies to deal with them. So we have lots of support for our families. They're not in it by themselves.
Good.
We have staff that continue to work with families as children grow and work on those relationships, which can get rocky. Yes. They can absolutely get rocky, just like in any family relationship. Yes. Things can get rocky.
They're kind of like a marriage, and in-laws have to struggle with each other occasionally.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you touched personally at all in your family by adoption?
Yeah. When I started the agency, I had 3 children born to me. My youngest was about 5 months old when I got the license for adoptions together.
Wow.
And so he grew up on adoption. I mean, in the early days, I did everything. I did placements out of my house, and I just answered the phone at night, and adoption punctuated almost everything we did. A funny story was I remember when my neighbor across the street was pregnant, and my then 7-year-old daughter said, Mommy, do you think Mrs. Walsh is going to make an adoption plan for her baby or raise the child themselves? And I said, well, Mr. and Mrs. Walsh, this is their 4th child, and they are in the position to raise a child themselves. And so I think it will be just fine. Yeah. And then for my youngest son, I remember when he was about 6 years old, one day he asked with big eyes and tears in his eyes why his dad and I didn't adopt him. And I explained to him that it just shows how children understand adoption differently at different developmental stages. And I explained that he was born to us and we were in the position to raise him, and that this was, not something that we needed. Anyway, when when our youngest, our oldest was graduating high school and went into college, we decided to adopt a 4th child. So we, back in 2002, adopted our 4th child, who was 10 years old at the time.
Oh,
so
okay. Right out of the foster care system, huh?
It was a complicated situation that involved lots of different kinds of institutional care and broken promises. And but she came to us as a big, strong, healthy 10-year-old.
All right.
With a history of, with a very challenging history.
Mhm.
And, I really feel like she has been my absolute best teacher. It was one thing as a professional, I could teach all about it. I could coach parents. I could absolutely, I could teach professionals. I could supervise staff. And then as a parent, it was like, whew, yeah, this is what we're talking about. And, she did, but by being her mother, I did have the opportunity to really go deep inside of myself and have to develop a whole new set of skills, a whole new ability to navigate and tolerate systems that were very difficult. And I always say being the client is way overrated. It's way overrated. And I think as a professional, it's probably like the best thing because it's humbling. It's made me realize there's no us and them. There's just us, us human beings who are each waking up each day, trying to do the best that we can, given our own history, given what we know, given what's happened to us, and how our bodies are functioning in this moment.
Yes.
All of those pieces all go into every single person we're dealing with. And so you're not a foster child or an adopted child. You're a child who was adopted or a child who is in foster care. You're not just an adoptive parent. You're a parent who adopted your child.
Mhm.
And, we're not our diagnoses, and, so it just, my daughter's 31 now, my youngest, and my oldest is 40.
Wow.
And I have 4 beautiful adult children now who just can each give and receive love and take care of themselves and are productive members of the community, and just feel so incredibly blessed. I feel so blessed, and it was about 15 years of hard labor
Uh-huh.
to get to where we are today. And I would not change a single thing, when in this moment, when I look at sort of where we are. Actually, that's not true. There's a lot I would change with what I know today.
Hmm.
But I
Boy, can
wouldn't,
I relate to that? Yes. Yeah.
but as much as what I know today, like I didn't know then. And so what I do know today is grace and forgiveness, both for myself, and for each other, is just so incredibly important.
Yes.
Because it was always with the best of intentions that we did everything that we did.
Right. With
And
lack
some
of
of it was
information that comes later.
lack of information that comes later. And we can't change the past. It's only this moment. This is the only one that's real.
Yes.
Only one that's real.
So this is extremely hard work, and you've been at it a long time. How do you balance your life? What do you do that gives you pleasure outside of adoption, permanency, family work?
One, I appreciate my own family. Um, 2, I have wonderful friends and community. 3, I have 4 dogs and a cat. Love my animals. And I walk. I walk a lot. For years I would get up every morning and walk, 2 to 3 miles to start my day. Once my kids all stopped getting up early and I didn't have to, I stopped beginning my day that way. But I still do walk somewhere between 2 and 4 miles, probably 5 times a week. I
Wow.
also like the forest. I like being outdoors. And I like to read. I'm not a big TV watcher.
Okay.
I'm always curious. I'm always learning and exploring. And I think also the human connection piece. Like I love people and I love being with people, getting to know people. Um, and I'm also like super self-reflective. So I'm always taking classes to try to understand. Um, I'm really interested in nervous systems. You know, why do I feel the way that I do? Why
Yeah.
do you feel the way that you do? And then what can we do to change it so we feel more peaceful? Because these primitive brains that we have that are in our modern society that we live in, it can really get in the way. You know,
Yes.
we can really get in the way when they're telling us things are dangerous all the silly time because we have all this historical trauma within our bodies, and we've got these old brains that are always scanning the universe for danger, and they're telling us that there's danger, and then we get distracted by that danger when we don't have to,
Right.
because it's not really dangerous.
Yeah.
So I like meditation, and
You do all the right things for self-care. You're a perfect example of how one can exist in a very stressful and yet committed profession. I mean, clearly, you're a good example of how you maintain that hard work and still stay healthy.
Sharon, it's hard. I mean, there's nothing easy about carrying this much responsibility for all these years, and feeling like I want, on our adoption side, I want every parent who chooses adoption for their child to be fully informed and to be able to live with themselves. Back in the 80s, I went to an American Adoption Congress meeting in New York City, and I sat with a room of about 40 women who had all lost their children to adoption. That's how they defined themselves. And the pain was palpable. I mean, it was raw. It was just like, and I thought, I never want to work with somebody who feels that way.
Yes.
It can hurt, but I don't want people to lose their children. I want this to be a good, strong, viable option. I want people to, adopt children who have the capacity to be there for them. So we're all just human beings showing up, trying to do the best that we can,
Right.
but having the capacity for attunement and having capacity to see our children as someone that we're going to give roots and we're going to give wings to is really critical.
Yeah.
And we hear so much from the voices of people who were adopted, of not feeling seen, of having some really core issues. And so I want to be able to know that we did the absolute best that we could do. And then the feeling too of how we're supporting people as their children and their families are struggling. I know how it feels to be down on my knees on the floor, feeling like I cannot do this another minute as a parent, that this is so excruciatingly painful. And as broken as I felt, alone as I felt, I want to know that we have a team that can really be there to wrap around people and infuse the oxygen. I remember there was one paper that I wrote, an article that I wrote, and I said, we just need to, some days it's like you have to wear an oxygen tank and need to make sure that people have enough oxygen to breathe so they can be in relationship. So to make sure our team is really giving enough oxygen to families so they can be there in the rough moments as our children learn to emotionally regulate after having experienced trauma early in life. And then finally, for the staff, for my team, making sure they're well enough taken care of so they can show up, because we can't give to somebody else that which we don't have ourselves. And the work can be so incredibly hard. And then from the position of being at the executive director or CEO, which along the way we changed my title. I've got to hold them. I've got to hold them.
We create that safe space.
We create that safe space.
Yeah. Boy, you're giving so many rich lessons to anybody who's listening to this. I mean, you're so wonderfully articulate about the reality of it and the joy of it and the difficulty of moving through. I mean, people forget to breathe, literally. They don't even breathe. Yeah, they forget to breathe. Sometimes we have to remind, take a breath, take a breath. When you're done with this work, when the day comes that maybe you're my age and you decide it's time to retire, and I don't know that social workers ever retire. We're always involved in something, even if it's just letter writing to the editors of a newspaper. But when you retire, what do you want people to say about you? What do you want on in your eulogy when when somebody's standing up and talking about you? What do you want them to say?
I think what I would like to be said about me in my eulogy is what she did mattered. She
Mm,
cared. She did the best that she could. And when she learned differently, she did differently. I'd like them to say, if you see something, do something. Because I
mm,
think that was one of the best lessons that I got in my graduate school. I had a fabulous professor, Jack Kirkland, and he said, if you see something, do something. Join the school board, start an organization. Don't sit back and complain. Do something. So I never really saw myself as a particularly entrepreneurial sort. I didn't define myself as a high energy person. And when I saw this problem and the bias and the discrimination and the lack of opportunity for fellow human beings, I became on fire. And everything that had been poured into me to take action was initiated.
mm.
And so I just feel so incredibly fortunate that I've had the opportunity in my life. I mean, got lots more to do,
Yeah.
in this role and other roles, but lots more to do to really continue with this, because I think, and I look at you, Sharon, as a role model.
Thank you.
And I think, as we move through different ages and stages with our bodies, as they change, as our brains change, as our energy level changes, we have to adapt and adjust to make sure we can still do what really matters. And that's showing up. That's showing up when we see a need.
Mm. This is like a master class for people who are just beginning the field and a reminder for those of us who've been around for a while. So I really want to thank you. I wonder if you have any final thoughts, considering that maybe graduate students are watching this, or people who are thinking about moving into the adoption field, or people who are thinking of starting an agency. You have so many roles. Are there some final thoughts you want people to, I mean, you've given us so much, but do you have a few final thoughts you want to make sure get out there?
Yeah, absolutely. One is, if people are curious about the child welfare field, particularly working in adoption, I highly recommend exploring it. When I was in grad school, the only thing I wanted to be was a therapist, a family therapist, working with women. I mean, there was just, I thought there's being a therapist and then there's all that fluffy stuff. Oh my goodness. When I found my way here into adoption, I have never been so on fire about anything. And here I am now. I mean, I've been doing this work for about 40 years, 33 in my role at Adoptions Together. So one, explore it, step into it. Two, if you see something, do something. Don't just complain. Don't sit and look at what other people are not doing. Give a voice. Um, Talk about it with other people. Dream big. Dream big. Honestly, like, I'm a social worker. I had no business background when I started the organization. I mean, I barely knew what a board of directors was. I sort of knew what a nonprofit was, but not really. A budget, like, I don't know, a budget. All of those pieces, I had no idea. I had to learn every step of the way. And I think by having a great radar for brilliant people, I have always surrounded myself by people who knew something that I didn't. And by surrounding myself with the smartest people I could find and building on their strengths, that has led to the outcomes that we've had. We started out in the fundraising area, having yard sales, because
Wow.
we needed to welcome every child, which meant we welcomed a lot of kids with very high medical needs.
Right.
It was expensive to provide the services. It was hard to find the families. And now we do, over the years, we've done, grown, have a big development department and do very effective fundraising. So taking things in bite-sized pieces, surrounding yourself by the smartest people you can find, taking things in bite-sized pieces, following a dream, saying yes. That was I had the gift and the challenge of saying yes very abundantly. And saying yes very abundantly is great, except then you have to do all the things you said you were going to do. And so I learned over the years to be more, more careful, to think yes, and what's the plan for getting that done?
Yeah.
Just also to recognize that adoption is a beautiful opportunity when one finds himself in a position that, whether it's an expectant parent who is unable to raise a child that she chooses to give birth to, it can be a wonderful opportunity for a child to be raised with the safety and stability that a child needs. For a child who is unable to be raised by their parents because of mental health or other kinds of situations, adoption can give that child the safety and stability, connection that they need. And really not just seeing it as a one-time legal exchange, but as a lifetime journey that gets unpacked at different developmental stages differently. And it's something that it changes families, it changes communities, and really needs the attention that it deserves to help people be just as whole as they need to be, to have happy, healthy lives.
That's a lot.
I
have one more question that
Yeah.
I just have to ask you then.
Okay.
What needs to change? What do you
Oh my
want
goodness.
to have happen in our field?
A lot needs to change. We had a meeting this morning where we were talking about, it was a meeting where we were talking about how we work with other organizations and how sometimes it's really challenging because there's still a lot of people out there in the community that practice the old-fashioned kind of adoption, which is, let me see how I can get a child for this family.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't. And so I think we have to look at the commodification of children. When we have things like a Supreme Court justice saying that, there's loads of people who want to just adopt children, almost like they're commodities.
Yeah.
And so the commodification, there's a lot of people getting very rich at the expense of other people. And so I wish there was more safeguards, more legal safeguards in place to protect expectant parents from exploitation. I wish that there was laws that, there's some states that a woman can give birth and sign her parental rights in 72 hours. Her rights are done. I wish that would change, because I think that a parent needs time after a child's born to really process their decision and make sure, because this is it can be a wonderful lifelong decision when it's well thought out. And if we don't want people to live with regret, we have to get rid of these antiquated practices. Another thing, I wish that there was those birth father registries in more states, because we have so many situations where men can be unaccountable and children live in limbo for extended periods because there's no way of terminating father's rights, or something that takes months and months and sometimes years. I think the child welfare practice can change to really look at, as families are struggling, what on the front end can we do so their kids, don't have to be removed, particularly when there's neglect. If a parent leaves a child at home alone because they have to work, and they have no daycare, or they can't afford daycare, we ought to have systems that provide daycare. We ought to wrap that family with support. Anytime that there's harmful abuse, children need to be placed into safety. And but there's just seems like there's so much more we can do on the front end for child welfare involved families, to give them housing, to give them childcare, to give them medical care, to make sure they have food to eat, to make sure that parents are psychologically supported enough so that they can be there to meet their children's needs before we think about removal, before we think about it. Because when we look at the stats and racial profiling, we look in some communities where we see vast disparity between the number of kids in care and how they are racially represented within their community. So there's, from the child protection system to the foster care system, no child should age out. No child should exit foster care to nowhere. Every child needs a permanent family connection as they come out. We do a lot of work in that area too, working with the public agencies to in partnership to help identify permanent family connections, for youth before they exit foster care. And then the whole area of adoption competent kinds of adoption responsive therapy. You can have a therapist who can really hurt a family. I can remember going to somebody who said to me, we can absolutely work with you to see what's wrong with you, that you would keep a child of that age in your home. And, and I'll help you explore that, as compared to somebody I talked to the following week who said, you're raising a really a complicated child. How are you taking care of yourself? What can you do to stay whole? So, because the best thing she has going for her is your commitment to her. So how can I help? How can we help you stay whole so you can show up and you can still be there? So it's, it's vast across many different domains. And I think as we as we understand trauma-informed care, and we're working a lot within systems across the communities that we live in to educate people, providers of all sorts, to really understand, like, not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you, and how can I look behind your behavior to see how I can respond to you differently, and also how can I understand within myself why I might feel the way that I do, and how can I respond differently by regulating my own nervous system. There's a lot to do. And where I live in Maryland, we have this fabulous new governor. I feel so happy who has made it his point that we'll become a trauma-informed state. And we're just doing so much work. And I feel like there's a section of our society, I can't say our whole society because we live in such a fragmented society, which is so sad. But there's a sector of our society who's really focusing on this. How can we do more to connect with one another? And hopefully that will bleed over to the other side that is kind of breeding disconnection and othering
Janice,
each other.
I feel so connected to you. This has been such a powerful interview. You have touched on so many important aspects of our work, your morality, your values, your clarity, your professionalism shine through. And I really am so grateful that you're in the field and that you were willing to share your wisdom with us today. Really, it's been an absolute delight, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Sharon. I feel really honored to be here and doing this with you. I can't think of a better person to do it with. So thank you so much.